So, Stephen D here on Pure 24/7 Radio, and I am joined by a very special guest on this morning's wake up call. Hello, Matt Whitaker.
Hello, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure for you to join us. So, you're the director of Truth and Treason. Do you want to just give us a little bit of an overview of what Truth and Treason is?
Yeah, Truth and Treason is a film, true story. It's a World War II story about a teenager in Nazi Germany, a 16-year-old kid named Helmut Hubener, who ran a resistance group. He recruited a couple of his buddies, and they put out anti-Hitler, anti-Nazi leaflets back in 1941 in Hamburg. And it's this incredible story of a young man who saw what was wrong around him, even when most other people couldn't see it or wouldn't see it, and decided to take a stand.
Yeah, and to tell the truth, I guess it's a brilliantly titled film because it kind of says it all there, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was something. It really was the importance of truth in a world. I mean, this was a kid who was raised in Nazi Germany, and so he'd always been surrounded by lies. I mean, that's what he was raised with was propaganda. And somehow, once he had access to the truth, which for him, it's great that the film is opening here in the UK because it was the BBC broadcasts in the German language during World War II that he got access to, and he immediately recognized the truth. It's like he could tell there was something different what he was hearing from the BBC than what he was hearing on Hitler's broadcasts, and in Goebbels' radio broadcasts. But once he heard the truth, something inside him just said, "I have to share this. I have to speak the truth," and that's what he did, no matter how dangerous it was.
Yeah, it's a really powerful story. I'm curious to know how it is you came to be part of this particular project. So, how did that start for you?
Way back, actually, it was actually in June of 2001. I'll never forget it. It was June 6th, 2001, D-Day, 2001. And I sat down with an old man named Karl-Heinz Schnibe. He was the last surviving member of this group of young teenage resistance fighters. He was Helmut Hubener's best friend. And I sat down with him and interviewed him, and the story that he told me was just incredible. And I just thought, man, I have to share this story with the world. I didn't know at that time that it was two things. I didn't know it was going to take more than 2 decades to get a film out to the world, and I didn't know it was going to change my life. But it has. We did I did a documentary on it back in the early 2000s, and the story would not let go of me. So with my writing partner, started writing a screenplay, and just wouldn't let go. Carl and I became good friends, and he shared his story, and he entrusted me to try and tell it to the world, and so we just kept going until we were able to do so.
Wow. So this is quite a long time from the point that you just first heard about this. So this is very much a true story. And the thing about true stories is that there's a certain impact that they can have. And I'm curious to know how much of an impact it had just hearing about this true story. I mean, obviously it's gripped you a lot. So what kind of led to that becoming a film? What was sort of the passion behind that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had a very specific experience. When we were shooting the documentary with Carl, we actually flew him over. He lived in the United States, actually lived not very far from me, which was an incredible gift. But we flew him over to Germany, and we're visiting some of the places that he had lived when he was a teenager. Even some of the cells that he had been held in after he was arrested by the Gestapo were still in existence. We walked into those with him and filmed him there. But we also went to the place, and this is not a spoiler. People know that his friend Helmut Hubener, after they had operated for a year, they were captured by the Gestapo, and his 16-year-old friend, they were held trial, before a Hitler-appointed judge, and this young man, his friend Helmut Hubener, became the youngest resistance fighter in Nazi Germany to be sentenced to death for his crimes and was executed. The place of his execution is now a national memorial in Berlin. And so this is back in early 2000s, we were there with Carl, filming with him there at that site. While we were there, a busload of teenagers pulled up on a field trip to visit this memorial site. And their teacher came out and he was leading them around. And one of my crew pulled the teacher aside and they had this little photo on the wall. And if you've seen the film, at the very end of the film, you see a photo of the three boys, Helmut with Carl and Rudy as teenage boys. And that photo was on the wall. And my crew member pointed to the photo of young Carl and pointed to the old man standing over there, the real Carl, and said, "That's him." And the teacher just his jaw dropped, and he gathered his students around Carl and said, "Tell us your story." And Carl started sharing with them what he was doing when he was their age, as a resistance fighter. And as I was watching that happen, I just had this feeling come over me. I just thought, we're doing this little documentary for American television, but this is a story that could resonate across the world, and it could resonate to a younger demographic if it's not a documentary. And that's where the seed was planted for me to begin writing and developing this into a feature film, into a dramatic film. It was Carl's inspiration. As we were writing the script, I could call him up and say, "Hey, when you were getting interrogated by the Gestapo, how did that work?" And he would give these just incredible details about what it was like. This was a firsthand source. He was there. He was in the courtroom when his friend stood up and got in the face of this Nazi judge. It was just, what an incredible gift to have that as a source to develop this film.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. I knew that there was a true story behind this film. I didn't know how closely connected you were to that true story, meeting real people who had actually gone through this. That's absolutely amazing. Quite blown away by that. That's really cool. Having seen the film and seeing that true story come to life, it means it's a lot. It's a really powerful story. One of the things though is it can be quite harsh at times because it's real. This is what happens. It can be quite hard a hard pill to swallow at times. There are certain scenes, and I imagine getting that right would have been quite a challenge. How far do you go and keeping it real? So what would be some of the challenges there in keeping the realness, but also making it suitable to be watched?
It's a great question, and we were very intentional with how we handled the violence in the movie. To your point, we didn't want to soft pedal what happened to them. People needed to be faithful and to honor the risk that Helmut and his friends were taking by standing up for the truth and what was at risk for them. I didn't want to soft pedal that. But I also I wanted to create a film that parents could feel like they could take their young teenagers to, that they could take their 13-year-old child to come and see this, and understanding that, yes, there are some moments that are really hard to watch, but without crossing that line and into gratuitous violence. It was very, very intentional in the way that we did. And of course, how people react to violence is a very personal thing. And so I know that some people, have a hard time with it. And for me, I felt like we were portraying it honestly, but in a way that was accessible to not only to my demographic or to parents and that kind of, but to teenage children. I wouldn't recommend bringing a young child to see it, but I definitely feel like it's something that's accessible to a young teen for sure.
Yeah, definitely. The reality is it's a true story. It's very harsh, and the film does a brilliant job of capturing some of those harsh moments in a way that you can kind of see what happened, the realness of it, which is really good. So yeah, that's another aspect of things I wanted to ask you about. One question I have for a director, this is just me personally wanting to know that there's a lot of scenes, and you're not necessarily shooting them in chronological order. So I'm curious to know, how do you keep track of everything that's going on when you come to shoot a film? Because obviously it's not necessarily shot in chronological order. So how do you keep track of all that?
That's a great question. Thankfully, I'm surrounded by really smart, talented people who that is their job to kind of keep track of yeah. Because you're right, we're shooting things completely out of order. That's just the nature of almost every movie. If you're in a location, you're gonna if you're in a very expensive location, you're gonna shoot out all the scenes that take place in that location, even if some of them happen at the end of the movie and some of them happen at the beginning. For me, where as a director, where it really that become a really important part of that is working with the actors to make sure that there's a flow, a story arc for each of their characters, so that they have a clear understanding of where their character is in this scene, even if just an hour earlier we shot a scene with them that takes place, much later in the story. And so for me as a director, it really is what I take on in working with the actors is making sure that they're clear on each scene where their character arc is, where they are in this story, what has happened to them up to this point, even though we've filmed things that are already happening, have already happened later in the story. And that's where it gets really, I love the process of working with actors. I think our actors in this film, especially, I mean, it's four young actors that are our main players in this film. And I just felt like working with them to get that cohesion all the way across and that chemistry was a beautiful experience, and it's always a challenge to make sure that there is that flow of arc, even though you're shooting things way out of order.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So you mentioned earlier on how the whole process had changed your life. That's quite a strong statement. Do you want to expound that a little bit for how the whole process of creating this has changed your life?
Yeah, and I appreciate also being able to talk in this venue, because there were I'm a I'm a deeply devout Christian, and I believe that God feels, he wants us to be happy, and he wants to guide us and direct us. And I felt called to tell this story after I met Carl. I just felt like this was something that, for whatever reason, and I didn't fully understand why, I felt like God wanted me to tell this story. I can remember after I had a very strong experience where I felt that, I went home to my wife and I shared it with her, and I said, I think I'm supposed to tell this story as a film. And she was very supportive. And I remember telling her, and this was in 2005, I said, hon, this could take us a couple years. And and she said, okay, let's go. Well, it took more than a couple years. And so when I say it changed my life, for me, part of that was this being a process of learning that in my timeline, I would have said, yeah, let's, really work really hard. And in a couple of years, we'll have a film and it'll be out and it'll be this huge success. God had a different plan. He knew what he wanted, to happen. He knew the growth that I needed to have. And frankly, I'll tell you, if you saw the young man who plays Helmut in the film, who's just incredible, a young actor, a young British actor named Ewan Horrocks. And when we were shooting with him, back in, so we were shot this in Lithuania in 2024. And when we were shooting with him one day on set, we were talking about how I started writing the script for this in 2002. And he said, I was born in 2002. and he said, you just had to wait long enough for me to get old enough to play this. And I said, absolutely. That was totally worth it. But, not knowing back in 2001, 2002, how long it was going to take to tell this story and how long this journey was going to be, that changed my life. But also having the example of Helmut Huebner, as a 16-year-old who just said, I'm going to do what is right. Let the consequences follow, whatever those may be. I'm going to do what is right. These boys had grown up all in the same faith and singing every Sunday that old Christian hymn, do what is right, let the consequence follow. And he said that. I remember Carl telling me that. He said, we grew up that's what we sang. We heard that. We felt that. And Helmut did it. And we tried to follow his example. And I've been trying to follow his example as well. And so I guess that's one of the ways that it's really changed my life. I wish I were more like Helmut, who was a devout Christian himself. Helmut was trying to be like Jesus. I am too, but sometimes I'll say, WWHD, what would Helmut do? and try and be a little braver.
Yeah, it is a really inspiring story. So, I mean, being a part of writing the process of that is going to change you in some way. Just watching it, I felt certainly definitely challenged. about that whole idea of truth. And as you say, you do what's right and the consequences will follow, whatever they will be. And the devoutness, as you say, of those lads back in 1941, how strongly they felt it was right to do the right thing and they were going to face the consequences, and they did, which you see in the film. So it is definitely very powerful. If there was something you wanted people to kind of draw from watching the film, kind of a lesson learned from just simply watching the film, what might that be? What would be the message you want people to kind of come away with?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say that I never intended to make a message film. For me, I've been trying to tell a powerful story, and I want people just to have an experience and watch a movie and feel and have a cathartic experience. And that for me is the main important thing. Having said that, when I watch it, I do leave feeling inspired, even though, there are heavy things that happen in this film. At the end, people come out feeling like they want to be a little braver, like they want to stand up for what is right. I'll tell you again, personally, it makes me want to stand up. And if I see someone being mistreated, even in some small way, I want to step in instead of saying, oh gosh, I wish they wouldn't do that, to step in and say, hey, let's not do that. Or if I want to tell a half truth, instead to say, you know what, I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to say things and be honest. That's the way, I don't think most of us, thankfully, will never experience what Helmut and these boys went through. But in our own lives, we can, hopefully people will walk out and just feeling like, maybe I can stand up a little better. Maybe I can be a little bit more brave in speaking to the truth.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, when we see what they went through, just simply that story alone, you see what they went through, it can kind of make you think, well, if they can go through all of that, I can probably be a bit more honest and have a little bit of maybe criticism, and that would be the worst of it. I'm sure I can manage a little bit of criticism when I'm honest.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's that sense of, this is a real life story of people standing for truth, and the consequences that they faced. Standing for truth in your own life probably won't bring about the same level of consequences, so it's worthwhile doing, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So yeah, it's a really powerful story that's brought to life in this film, and I would definitely recommend watching it. So thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure chatting with some of the background of this film, what inspired it, and some of the process as well. 20 years, basically, more than 20 years actually, isn't it? It's more than 20 years to bring this film to life, and it's been quite a journey for you, and it's been a pleasure to chat a little bit about that with you today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
The very first edition of our brand new monthly magazine, By Men for Men, hits the streets from the 1st of May. Pure Men's Mag is go. We've pulled together the very best writers we could find, scouring the earth, looking high and low, which means we've done the hard work for you. All you have to do is grab yourself a subscription. We've got digital subscriptions available everywhere via our website, or a 6-month subscription of these high quality, non-digital, tactile interfacing devices. They don't crash, they don't need updates, the battery's always at 100%. And even better, a brand new one appears every single month. Just head yourself over to www.puremensmag.com and grab yourself a copy. These are by men, for men, and always AI free. Pure Men's Mag is a go.